So we're finishing up chapter 1, section 1, and we're talking about the nature of science. It says science is the systemic study of God's universe and how it works. Before you begin to study the science of chemistry, you must have some understanding of how science works and what the purpose is. And this is where we get into the scientific method. So you should already know about the scientific method because all sciences and all experiments go through this scientific method. So what is this scientific method? Well, there's 3 main steps here, as you see here, to the scientific method. The first is the observing, and this is gathering data, which involves measuring and organizing data and searching through the work of other scientists. So gathering your data. First of all, you look up all the things about that you know about this experiment and gathering this data, all data together and doing any measurements that you need to do, right? Then on to the hypothesis. The hypothesis, what is that? Well, you guys know that that's a suggested explanation for the observations. You develop this hypothesis, which is a tentative explanation of the natural phenomenon. So really, you're looking at this hypothesis, speculating about the nature and forming general principles to explain it. It's an educated guess. You're going to be guessing. And in this guess, to figure out does it affect the experiment? So hypothesis onto the experiment. Well, first of all, you have to know something about your hypothesis. It has to be reproducible. That means other people have to be able to use the same hypothesis and come to the same conclusions. And so other people can verify your experiment. It also has to be testable. You have to have it testable or you can't even do it. So you can do a hypothesis and it's a guess, but then again, you can't test that guess, so you can't do the experiment. So it has to be testable and provable and reproducible, right? So to reproduce it. So that's something about the hypothesis. Also, on to the experimenting. What is experimenting? Well, that's a carefully controlled artificial situation is an experiment. So you're testing your hypothesis in a systemic way to determine if it's valid. You're doing the experiment. You have a controlled environment so you can do this. You have variables in experiment. And there's 2 different variables. One is really the change factor, the variable that changes. Like how does temperature affect the chirping of a cricket? So your variable would be temperature, right? So a constant would be you'd keep everything else constant so that the other things would be not changing. So, everything would be the same. Nothing else would change but the variable, and all the other factors would be constant. So does this change affect the result? And make sure that all the other factors are not changing because they may be affecting it anyway. So maybe the temperature, maybe the temperature, not just temperature, but maybe other factors like food or, the environment and other things can influence those are the other factors that have to be kept constant. Okay, that's the scientific method. And you should know this already, so this is pretty much review. But let's go on to the next page here. So then we're going to talk about, up here at the top, theory and a law. So how do they develop scientific theories and scientific laws? Well, what is a theory? Well, a theory needs many experiments tested over and over by other scientists still to try to prove that something is false. So a theory would be still a theory, is not a law, but it's been tested over again. And a law is a theory that has stood the test of time, many years. But man's best understanding how God works, the universe is still imperfect from the way God does. So even a law can change, but usually a law, when you talk about a scientific law, it has been set over many, many decades of time. And a theory has been set over many, many experiments, right? So the purpose. So let's go down when it talks about the purpose of science. So let's go lower on here and see, those are your questions, but let's talk about the purpose of science. So what do you think is the purpose of science? Well, how should a Christian view science? Well, science deals with only the physical universe, not with the spiritual, not with the supernatural, not with the moral, not with your human personality. That's beyond the realm of science. No science can really talk about the afterlife, really. And no science can talk about necessarily miracles. Those are all in God's realm, right? And science cannot answer all of our questions. So we have questions, and the more we study, the more we don't know. You find, and even science, even now, some of the scientific facts they thought before in the last 100 years have proved now that are not correct. That the speed of light is changing is one of them. So science does, but always remember that Jesus is the center, is the creator. By him, all things consist and are held together. So although science, can change and theories can change, that God never changes. And that, of course, it says that all things are held together by Jesus. So basically, the purpose of science is observing God's world, right? The science of chemistry is not governed by haphazard or disordered principles, but rather by order, and that leads to the reproducing those effects. Chemistry is not mysterious or magic. It works to discover and to state laws which describe but not necessarily explain the behavior of nature, to make it work for the benefit of man. Don't you love that way that is? The science of chemistry is not haphazard right there, or disordered principle, but rather by an orderliness that leads to reproducible effects. And God is order. These laws help man subdue nature and make it work for the benefit of man. That's what God wanted us to do. So let's look at the questions in the review, because some of these will be on your test, I'm sure. Number 1, what branch of chemistry is foundational to the other areas of chemistry? Well, how about physical chemistry, physics? Physical chemistry is in all the other branches. Number 2, what is the chemistry of living things? Bio means living things. Biology means the study of living things, so biochemistry would be number 2. Number 3, list 5 areas in your everyday life that are affected by chemistry and chemical technology. So let's go ahead and list 5 things, major things. Okay, let's just think. So if you were studying biology, or say that you want to be an engineer, yeah, there's a lot of things you need to study about chemistry. Excuse me. Oh, pharmacology, another thing. Anything that you do, in fact, if you are a pharmacologist, say that you are a clinician, say that you are dealing with environmental science, all of these things, everything you do actually has to do with chemical technology. Okay, on to number 4. List 3 main steps of the scientific method and briefly explain each step. I hope you can do that. We went over those steps, and as you recall, they're observing, hypothesizing, and experimenting. And you can describe those in your own words. So what are 2 important characteristics of a good hypothesis? A good hypothesis or guess has to be testable, and it has to be reproducible. You have to be able to test it, and you have to be able to reproduce the experiment. How should a Christian view science? Well, a Christian should view science, because science is only physical, not spiritual. It can't measure spiritual things. We know that. And science cannot answer all questions. Only God can. So it's science and the Bible can go hand in hand. But we have to view science that it's not a religion, right? And it's definitely not God. It's not Jesus. So science can change, but God never changes, right? So that's it.